I first used Blender back in 2013 and I made this subway tunnel. I found the program pretty confusing and hadn't really touched any 3D software since then. I've developed a bit of experience with After Effects and its limited 3D capabilities, and I kind of wanted to do more. I've also had a bit of experience with nodes before with a program called Touch Designer. I had some free time during my semester break and decided to learn Blender. Also, a good friend of mine took his own life, and I think I just needed something to delve into for a while. So anyway, here's my 5 weeks with Blender. I started with Andrew Price with his famous donut tutorial. It was fairly straightforward and pretty fun. I found maybe one or two things a little bit difficult, and then I took his challenge on to try and make something similar. Then I started experimenting with just everything. Making photorealistic stuff is so satisfying, but I quickly started reaching the limitations. It's like you can't just render everything right now. Then I did his chair tutorial, which I quite liked because it was more of this hard shape stuff. And then finally had enough knowledge to actually tackle an Ian Hubert tutorial and made this little building. I started playing around with little mechanical things, like little robot arms. I find all that stuff really fascinating, but I don't really know much about it. I started looking at a few tutorials, and then I discovered this thing called hard surface modeling. I've always just seen various things on the internet and was like, oh, that's cool. Never knew that it sort of had an actual name. So yeah, I started doing tutorials about that. Then I started trying to create more realistic machines. I started to realize I have no idea how machines actually work. So I did research about how hydraulics works because I'd heard of that before, but I didn't really know what it is. And then I found out about pneumatic pistons and all sorts of things. So I tried to create one using these plans and then make this little crane arm thing.
That is a great question, my average viewer, and I think it probably makes sense to do a bit of an overview before we speed run the first method. So with Wonder Open, take out the default cube, replace this with a point with a bunch of divisions, set the shape.
Then I discovered CG Matter. He does all this like meme style tutorial stuff, but it's really complicated and cool, involves maths and a lot of nodes. You can actually create geometry using displacement from the texture itself. Followed his tutorial on unwrapping textures. That's something I've done in After Effects, but it's always been quite complicated. It's a lot easier in Blender. Made this corridor thing. I played around with drivers, which are kind of like programming functions that can run while the program is running. And then I started getting into scripting. The corresponding code to anything you do in Blender is displayed in the info tab, so you can actually just copy and paste that into the console of the program and run the script. And you can also create your own add-ons and run your own scripts anytime you want, which is pretty cool. It started getting a little bit overwhelming at this point because there's just so many things you can do, and it's like hard to know what to focus on first and like what to learn and why is this happening. And then I discovered Andrew Price actually had like a 4-week self-taught curriculum, so I just decided to follow that. So I followed his Anvil tutorial, and then I tried to do some lighting experiments. This one kind of went a bit weird. And then I tried to replicate some photos that would be achievable with the skills that I'd developed so far. That was quite a difficult exercise that I set for myself. It's weird, some things are kind of easy to get and then other things are quite hard to do, but I definitely learned a lot from that. And then I just randomly came up with this other idea for a project. So my housemate works at a winery and I tried to make one of those smooth ads with all the nice lighting. So I set about trying to unwrap the wine bottle and model it. This turned out to be really hard. First of all, it's really hard to take a photo of a reflective surface, but I managed to find out a way to do that, and I measured the bottle and modeled that. Getting the textures off of the projection was probably the most difficult part. First, I took all the photos at various consistent angles, and then I unwrapped them and then join them all in Photoshop to one consistent texture, so then I could put it on the bottle. Glass and refraction of light are pretty complicated, and I was getting a little bit confused as to why I was getting all these bizarre results. I discovered Andrew Price had done a tutorial on something pretty similar, so I did that, created this beer. And then I also did some other little experiments with light distortion. Finally, I created the bottle and started to render it, but it was going to take forever, so I actually used Concierge Render, which was this render farm in the States, which CG Matter promoted, and here's how it turned out. Also, I found this other rendering solution called Sheepit. It's kind of like torrenting, but instead of torrenting things, you render other people's projects and then you get points. And then when you want to render something, your project has more priority. Coming back to the 4-week curriculum, created this sand, looks pretty cool. I played around with texture tiles. I tried to create this node system that created 3 different types of tiles at 3 different heights of displacement. That turned out to be quite challenging. And then also played around with Mixamo, which is a place you can get 3D characters and animations. Here's the final scene that I created after the 4-week curriculum. I quite liked it, but I wanted to try something a little bit more challenging. I started working to create this scene using animations rather than a static image, and created this. So from here I started playing with particles and volumetric clouds and making planes. I actually just started watching a huge amount of tutorials. And then I got to the most fun part of Blender, which is the physics system. So rigid body systems, dynamic hair, soft body things, and cloth simulations, fluid simulations. So much fun. Then I tried to incorporate some physics with animation as well, which was actually quite challenging, but really effective for creating cool shit. So that was the first 4 weeks of my experience with Blender. I knew for the last week, the 5th week, I just wanted to make a short sequence with everything I'd learned so far. When I was a kid, I fucking loved the early like StarCraft and Dawn of War cinematics. I wanted to create something kind of looking the same and mechanical and yeah. So I started this idea for this like crane thing, working in like a scrapyard. Yeah, I just started researching that whole environment. I looked into how scrap metal works and how cranes work and how metal is formed, which is, it's all really interesting stuff.
The ability to change shape under pressure.
I found this awesome tractor in the middle of nowhere, which I took a bunch of photos of and used that for inspiration. Looked into how oxy torches work. Eventually I designed this basic crane thing with like a diesel electric motor. It probably wouldn't exist because apparently building suspended monorails is a really bad idea, but I think it looks cool, so I built it. And then I did a bunch of physics tests as well to see if I could incorporate those. And yeah, here's the final scene. I tried just to focus on the things that were like the main effects because time is limited and I set myself the deadline of 1 week. So I'm trying to work with the philosophy of the project isn't finished, but I'm finished with the project. Otherwise I just end up spending forever on a project, or sometimes it doesn't even get finished.